Everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see some people on here that I've seen at past events. It's so nice to see all your faces at the end of this day. My name is Melanie Brooks. For those that you don't know me, I work as the audience coordinator at the Bangor Daily News. And tonight I have a co-host. It is Aislinn Sarnacki, one of the editors at the Bangor Daily News. And I'm so excited that she's joining me. And we're both really excited to welcome our special guests from Baxter State Park, Acadia National Park, and the Maine Bureau of Parks and Land. So we've got the trifecta of Maine parks all in our event tonight. And we're really excited to talk about July 4th weekend and the rest of the summer. So for those of you who are in the audience tonight who are subscribers, thank you so much for your support. And for those of you that are here tonight for maybe the first time, welcome. We've been doing these events probably once or twice a week since the beginning of April. And I hope that you come back and check out some of our events in July and the rest of the year. Aislinn will be asking our guests some questions, but we absolutely want to hear your voices too. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, please send it in using the chat function. And if you haven't done that before, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen called chat. There's a little chat bubble. I'm going to chat to everybody. There's a lot of you here, so if you could please send your questions in via the chat, I can pose them on your behalf. And then at the end, we'll do a little unmuting so you guys can share your comments and questions with our guests. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my co-host. Aislinn Sarnacki is the editor of Act Out. It's a section of the Bangor Daily News that features stories. She does videos, photos, and other content about a wide variety of outdoor activities, nature, and conservation. So she's the perfect co-host for me tonight. She produces a weekly column about hiking trails and other destinations throughout Maine. And she has authored three hiking guidebooks. So she has been all over the state, and I'm so glad that she's here. Thank you, Aislinn, for joining us tonight. And I'm going to give you a moment to introduce our three guests before we start in with questioning. So go ahead, Aislinn.
So I've got some bios here because I could not keep this in my noggin, even if I tried. And let's get going. So we have three guests tonight. Eben Sypitkowski is the director of Baxter State Park. Eben grew up biking, hiking, and canoeing in the woods and waters of Maine. He is a graduate of Bangor High School and earned his Master's of Forestry at the University of Maine, so a local boy. A student of the woods for his entire life, he worked for the New England Forestry Foundation before landing his dream job as resource manager at Baxter State Park. 2 years ago, he stepped up to the director role of the park, and he lives in Millinocket with his wife and 2 children. Our next guest is Mike Madell. He is a deputy superintendent of Acadia National Park. Mike has spent his professional career caring for the natural and historic resources of our country. After receiving his master's degree from the University of Minnesota, he has served with Michigan State Parks, the United States Forest Service, and for the past 32 years, the National Park Service. Mike is now in his 6th year at Acadia. He lives in Bar Harbor, where you can often find him running or hiking in the park with his wife and dog. And then our third guest is Andy Cutko. He's the director of the Bureau of Parks and Lands in the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Andy oversees the Maine State Park System, more than 500,000 acres of Maine public lands, and the state's ATV, snowmobile, and boating programs. Over the past 30 years, Andy has worked in natural resource management for the government, private, and nonprofit sectors, focusing on the intersection of science and land use policy. Andy holds degrees in biology and forestry and is a licensed forester in Maine. He is a lifelong camper and intends to spend his holiday weekend, like many other Mainers, camping in a Maine state park. All right, so let's just jump right in with probably the most important question of the night, and that is, what can visitors expect when they head to the parks over the 4th of July weekend? And just asking each speaker to speak to their park. Yeah, so who wants to go first?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Melanie and Aislinn, for the opportunity to share our story at Maine State Parks. We have been open since June 1st, and Baxter opens on July 1st, and Acadia opens on August 1st. So we probably have the longest story to tell about camping in the era of COVID. I think when visitors visit state parks this year, on the surface, things will look very familiar. You'll see a lot of Mainers out enjoying the woods and wilds of Maine, and you'll see happy families and others. But beneath the surface, things really are a bit different. On one note, we're actually seeing a lot more Mainers and a lot fewer people from away. Certainly the statewide travel restrictions have limited visitors coming from other states. On the same token, we're seeing a significant upswing in the numbers of Mainers who are actually getting out and enjoying the parks. So that's a great thing. And then I think behind the scenes, certainly all the effort that we have put into acquisition of personal protective equipment and retrofitting entrance stations to protect our staff and visitors, signage around bathrooms, limiting the number of stalls in bathrooms, signage around physical distancing, and in some cases limiting some of our more popular parks to 50%. Those are some of the steps that we've taken to ensure that not only our staff but the public are safe in an era of COVID. So it's June 3rd. We've been open for roughly a month, and I'd say things are going really well. It's been really busy with all the hot and summer-like weather and kids out of school and families wanting to get outside. So it's been challenging so far, but we're thrilled to be open, and we're happy that so many Mainers are getting out and enjoying these special places.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andy. That pretty much summarized, I think, probably a lot of trying to make COVID modifications and make our experiences as safe as possible for everybody coming into each of these areas. And you've also set the tone by you're June 1st, we're July 1st, and Michael will be August 1st. So maybe that's the order we can take these questions too. At Baxter, we are open right now to day use, but not yet to camping until tomorrow. And so I think collectively the staff right now is breathing a big sigh of anticipation. I don't know if it's relief yet. We're waiting with bated breath to see how this goes. We hope that it's as smooth as Andy just described. We also have many of the same modifications to ranger stations, the gate, and lots of signage to help people, to remind people about physical distancing, wearing masks where that can't be possible, and also some restrictions on capacity to help people to make sure that there aren't crowds where there typically are at Katahdin trailheads mostly. So we're excited as well and nervous, I'll be honest, to see how this goes. Yes, as Andy mentioned, we have sort of less experience with this so far. We have been open for day use for a little while, but that's been pretty minimal. We found that there was a great opportunity to do a number of road maintenance projects while we didn't have visitor access this spring. So we've had some pretty great silver lining opportunities to improve our infrastructure along the road system, which most of you probably know to be long and windy. I guess one of the, a few of the things that folks should expect for Baxter is to see a lot of these, and some of these, and to sort of we're still working on a lot of this, so have some patience. Bring your own mask, bring some hand sanitizer because there aren't many hand washing stations, and bring some patience along with you too, because we're still working out some of the kinks and trying to understand how all this is going to flow this year. But we're excited to bring people into the park, and also excited to announce that as of yesterday, the Saddle Trail is clear of snow as well. So the whole mountain, besides Dudley, which we hope to finish this year, all the trails on the mountain will be open tomorrow.
Well, I'm finishing with Acadia. I'll start off with a technical correction. Acadia actually never closed, throughout this pandemic. At the beginning of the year and up through today, the 120 miles of hiking trails in the park have been open, continue to be. And then we phased in facilities as time has gone along. We now have 45 miles of carriage roads that are open to all uses, to pedestrian, hikers, runners, cyclists, and equestrian uses. Our Halls Cove Visitor Center is open, although slightly modified from what you are probably used to. Instead of doing inside, we have rangers set up in open air tents outside, providing information and answering questions. The tour road, Park Tour Road, is now completely open. About the only thing that we don't have open so far is the campgrounds, and that's what we're aiming for August 1st for. Assuming no surprises come up between now and then, I expect those to be open about the 1st of August. Some things that are not open yet, in addition to the campgrounds, the Nature Center at Cerdamont. We have rangers roving through there occasionally, but the building itself is not open. Some of our picnic areas, such as Bear Brook and Thompson Island, are also not open right now. But come on out. For this time of year, it's been unusually quiet, although over the last week or two, we've seen an uptick in visitation. Last year, on the 5th of July, was the all-time single-day busiest day for Acadia ever. I don't think we're probably going to make that this year, but we miss a lot of the folks that we see every year and hope that you can make it out.
You guys got to some of my next question. A lot of you guys started getting into that, and that's what remains closed to visitors right now. Is there anything else that is remaining closed to visitors at this time? I know a lot of you guys touched on that already, but.
I guess I should jump in, Aislinn. One of the biggest absences we'll have this year is the Island Explorer bus system. Because of difficulties in maintaining social distancing, difficulties in getting drivers, and so for some other reasons, we've decided, along with our partners at Down East Transportation, not to operate the Island Explorer this year. So it won't be quite as convenient to get around to some parts of the park if it does indeed get a little busier.
In the state parks, really about the only thing that remains closed is our visitor centers, and we're looking to start opening those up in the next few weeks. And we've also been delayed in getting many of our interpretive programs up and running. These are programs where rangers have groups of students or others out on the trail doing nature walks, various activities. Because of the group limitations, those have been restricted, but we are thinking about ways that we can safely do those moving forward.
I think the only thing I didn't mention was that bunkhouses won't be open in the park this year. All other site types will be as of tomorrow.
All right. So what is reduced visitation for 2020, or is there reduced visitation for 2020? What does that mean for your park or parks?
Sure, I can jump in on that. And I don't think there will be reduced visitation based on what we've been seeing, both in terms of campground reservations and also day use areas. I was out at Camden Hills State Park today, and I was at Reed State Park on Sunday, and speaking with park managers throughout the state. We are seeing heavy use, and so our reservations thus far this year are actually ahead of last year. And again, the dynamic is, while we're seeing fewer people from out of state making campground reservations, I think our reservations from Mainers are up 37% compared to last year. And again, the day use parks have been seeing very heavy use. So at the end of the day, it'll obviously be interesting to see how the summer plays out. And obviously that will depend on further travel limitations and the trajectory of the virus and our response and so forth. But thus far, I would say, if anything, people are appreciating our parks more than ever. There's a real need to get outside, and it's emotionally healthy, it's physically healthy for people to be visiting parks and open spaces. And we're seeing that not only at our state parks, but our public lands, just to mention a few places. Tumbledown Mountain, one of our treasured public lands. There have been weekends when we've had more than 100 cars at the base of Tumbledown. And at Camden Hills, there have been weekends where people have been parking out on Route 1. So people have been getting outside, which is a great thing. But we've also got to be cautious and thoughtful about directing people to places that aren't quite as popular from a public health and safety standpoint. But definitely heavy use in the state park system.
From the standpoint of Acadia, I guess I'd say that, to be honest, we don't know. We don't have a magical crystal ball that's guaranteed to work through pandemics and some of the other phenomena we're seeing now. I agree with Andy. We certainly are seeing a lot more Mainers here than we typically do this time of year. I'm glad you're coming out. But the last 2 years, we've had more than 3.5 million visits in each of those years. And I don't see us making that this year. Boy, we'll really be inundated over the next month or two if we start to approach that level.
I think likewise at the park, we're again not sure what we're looking at. It'll be interesting. Our reservations are pretty much tracking how they have in the past, and getting fairly full for July and August, as we typically are. How many of those folks from out of state that are retaining those reservations now will actually show is a major question of mine. I think yes, we too will see more folks from Maine, and we certainly welcome that. I think another piece about what reduced visitation actually means from our perspective is, at least for the park, our primary objective is resource protection. And so if in fact this season we do see reduced visitation, we've been thinking about that from the sort of silver lining perspective of maybe it gives the mountain a little rest from the typical sort of large crowds that it tends to see, and all of the infrastructure that gets weighed heavily upon during the summertime. We're hopeful that we get a little break from some of that. I think for the visitor experience part of it, it may mean that it's a little bit easier to get to a more solitary experience than in other years, if again, in fact, we do have reduced vegetation. A lot of what the park's about is sort of echoing what Andy said there, is about connecting with nature on your own terms. And I think a lot of people use the park in that way, and I think it'll just sort of be even less crowded in many areas. It's not very crowded in many areas most years. If anybody's ever been to sort of the north end of the park, we think about that as almost a different country from anything around Katahdin. Katahdin brings in a lot more people than the rest of the park. So we are looking forward to that. We are not looking forward to some of the other issues about reduced revenue and reduced just sort of basic access. It hasn't been a whole lot of fun to tell people no for the month of June, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming people back here so that people can connect with this pretty incredible rugged wilderness, especially during this time as we all sort of feel this baseline anxiety. And I think, again, as Andy mentioned, this is it's a really important psychological thing to get out in the woods and do some forest bathing and that kind of thing.
So switching gears here a little bit. What benefits do you see the Great American Outdoors Act having for Maine?
With the National Park Service, we're keeping our fingers crossed that passes through Congress. In theory, it could have up to $9.5 billion of impact for us and for state parks, for other areas over the next 5 years or so. I'm sure that Eben and Andy both have a lot of uses in their facilities that money could go for, and we certainly do here. Renovation of facilities, repairs that have long been overdue can be addressed. And we can't forget the state side, the Land and Water Conservation Fund that would also be funded through that. That money goes not only to the federal agencies such as the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, etc., but also to the states. There's a state side of that money that goes to local parks here in Bar Harbor and Bangor, down in Portland, you name it. So again, we're keeping our fingers crossed that actually passes through Congress.
Yeah, I think it was a really wonderful thing to see Senator Angus King talk specifically about Baxter State Park on the floor of Congress as he advocated for this act. And I think, yeah, any sort of more significant funding and more sustained funding over time for outdoor recreation in the nation as well as the state is just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I would echo that. And just as background for the folks who may not have heard about it, it's called the Great American Outdoors Act, and it's working its way through the federal legislation at this point. The Senate has approved it. I think the House is going to vote on it sometime later in July, and President Trump has indicated that he's likely to sign it. So it's a great source of funding for both the national parks and state parks and town parks as well through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We are likely to see, if this act passes and if it's fully funded, a doubling of monies to go to both state and town parks. And so it will be a huge asset for us in the state. We have many years of funding deficits of basic infrastructure, of buildings and trails and roads. We were all cautiously hopeful for a Land for Maine's Future bond going through the state legislature this past spring, and then COVID hit, and of course that's now up in the air. So we are fully supportive of both federal and state funding efforts that will direct monies to building our state park system.
Great. So switching gears again, what advice do you have for Mainers, especially when many of us are staying in state this summer and enjoying our own local resources? Do you have any advice for how they can enjoy Maine this season and stay safe?
Start off on that one. I think there's been a good little meme around, or a hashtag around, recreate responsibly. And some of the pieces of that have been really helpful for me to understand what's appropriate to do during this era, and what to sort of not bother with this year. And I think one of the most important pieces from our standpoint is thinking about playing it safe, essentially not taking sort of the same risk that you might in other years in the outdoors, particularly when public health systems may be strained, emergency first responders may be otherwise occupied. And trust me, we've been working through a lot of our search and rescue protocols here in conjunction with folks learning from some of the issues that the National Park Service has had down on the island and other places. And it's pretty complicated to think about how you sort of treat rescue victims when it's 90 degrees out. You got to wear one of these, or worse, an N95 mask, and how you move somebody 3 miles out of the wilderness at that point. So recognizing that is always a message that we try to put out there, that when you come to a wilderness, you are in fact managing your own risk, and rescue may be hours away, but it's particularly important this year, I think. And so recreating locally, recreating safely, making sure that you are bringing a mask so that when you do get into situations where you can't be physically distanced, you are protecting other people. And recognizing too, just what we've been trying to do is mitigate as much of this risk as we can from COVID. We are disinfecting several facilities and pieces of our infrastructure, and modifying some of that so that we don't allow as many people into confined spaces. But as I think all know at this point, the viral transmission dynamics of COVID are such that all of this comes down to personal responsibility. And it's the same things we've been hearing from the CDC forever, or not forever, it just seems like forever, but it's been 3 months, right? In terms of maintaining physical distance, practicing good hand hygiene, not touching your face, and checking in with yourself and making sure you're healthy before you venture out into public. So I think getting back to those basics of CDC guidance is pretty important in terms of recreating within or without of this, outside of the state this year.
Yeah, I would certainly echo everything that Eben said. Every bit of that applies to Acadia as well as the state parks. But please, do get out and enjoy the parks. Good time of year to explore some areas that maybe you haven't explored before. Aislinn with her column and the videos that she does always highlight some hidden out of the way places. You'll explore one of them. But again, as Eben said, be careful. Know your own abilities and don't take chances, because you're not only going to get yourself in trouble, but with COVID and other phenomena, you may all put first responders in harm's way also.
I would echo what both my colleagues said, and the other pitch I would make is for a resource called Maine Trail Finder. If you Google Maine Trail Finder, it's a great online site that is a good way to find trails that may not be as heavily used as others. As I spoke about, places like Tumbledown and Camden are really getting almost overrun with people to the detriment of both the resource and potentially public health and safety. The state of Maine owns more than 600,000 acres of public lands. Places like Namacanta and the Saboas unit and the Amherst Public Land Unit not far east of Bangor, the Machias Lakes area for boaters. So there are lots and lots of places to go where if you're smart and if you're safe, you can have a really wonderful outdoor experience without dealing with the crowds. So check out Maine Trail Finder, and Maine Trail Finder, the other advantage of it is that for those trails that are seeing a lot of use, there is a COVID alert notifying them as such. And so it's a good way to find places that are a little bit more under the radar.
And similar to that, I guess I would add, have a plan B. If you're going to Acadia here and you think you're going to walk this trail, you get to the trailhead, it looks busy, have an alternate plan in place where you could go, or even go further down east if it looks too busy for you here and you're concerned about being able to keep proper social distance, etc.
All right, and my last question for you guys before we get into the audience questions is, what are the biggest challenges you've been facing due to COVID-19? I know you've touched on some of that already, but anything you haven't mentioned?
Well, for us, as I said earlier, there's no playbook for this. This is all new. We're kind of in some ways feeling our way as we go along. Some of the challenges for us have been, for example, getting the number of staff that we would normally have this time of year. Because of social distancing and other guidance that the state and the CDC have put out, we've had to totally reconfigure our housing situation that we use during the year to house seasonal employees. Thus, we do not have nearly as many as we usually do. So trying to figure out how we operate the park with less staff. Also trying to prepare for any number of contingencies. What would happen if the staff at a certain campground, once we open, comes down with COVID, and all of a sudden, instead of having 4 or 5 people work there, we don't have any. What are we going to do then? So all that kind of scenario planning is certainly different also.
Yeah, we certainly have some similar challenges that we're trying to think through some of those scenarios as well. I think one of the biggest challenges just in this whole era, and it's not necessarily just related to the park, but it's sort of through the whole thing, is the difficulty of sorting through incomplete information and uncertainty for, working on 3.5 months of sort of incrementally learning a little bit more about how this virus actually works and what we can and can't do and what's safe and what's not. I think that has also played out in terms of interactions with others, everybody's right here. Like there's, ropes are shorter and tensions are higher. And I think sort of trying to maintain calm and provide the best possible information to visitors and staff and sort of try to cut through all that uncertainty and make something that makes sense has been a really interesting and wholly consuming challenge.
Thank you all, and Aislinn, great questions. That we have a bunch of questions from the audience. A couple of people want to know from the three of you about your public facilities, washrooms, toilets, showers. Are they open? And if they are, how are you maintaining them?
So ours are open. We typically are for bathroom facilities that have multiple stalls. We are cordoning off every other one, so we're limiting them to 50% capacity. We do have signage regarding mask wearing, and they are sanitized and cleaned quite frequently, I would say, every hour or two during the day. So that's been a top priority for us, is acquiring, cleaning, and sanitizing equipment and getting those cleaned as frequently as we possibly can. Limiting the numbers of people inside, just like when you all go to Hannaford, you see lines on the floor for how to distance yourselves outside of the facility. We've done that, and lots of signage.
Very similar here in Acadia. Use of a lot of signage. We don't have shower facilities, so we don't have that concern, but we certainly clean the restrooms as often as we can.
Yeah, I think Andy's got the tallest load in terms of facilities management here. We're pretty Spartan. We are also cleaning outhouses more than is the basic recommendation from the state. Cleaning high-touch surfaces on cabins. We've purchased more spray and go and alcohol wipes than I care to admit. Yeah, we're working on a lot of those disinfecting pieces, as well as a ton of signs to let people know what we aren't disinfecting, which is important, and possibly might get to one of those questions I saw in the chat. We do have canoes, paddles, and PFDs available this year. They will not be rented as they typically are, but available as a sort of use at your own risk, so that we don't have to get into trying to disinfect those, especially canoes around water bodies. Generally, though, our facilities are fairly simple and generally wooden. The CDC recommends against trying to disinfect wood surfaces that aren't treated. So lean-tos will not be disinfected, and picnic tables won't be disinfected either. So all of those sorts of things are used at your own risk.
I would just add that one of those nice advantages that I have in my position is that I've been privy to a number of different calls with state park directors from up and down the East Coast. And as spring has hit, and obviously as COVID has hit a number of other states much more severely than it's hit Maine, I've had the opportunity to share and listen and learn from states from Florida all the way up the East Coast to how different state parks are dealing with the situation. And because many of them were open to camping much earlier than we were, it gave me an opportunity to learn what they were doing. And then obviously for me to be able to share that with my staff and touching base occasionally with Eben has been really effective as well.
That's great. Thank you. Mary and Michael both had a question about something that Andy had mentioned about the state parks that were very popular. He mentioned some of the parks would have reduced admittance. And so Mary and Michael wanted to know what parks would have that reduced admittance and what is it reduced to? Is it 50%? Or what number does that look like?
Yeah, very, very good question. And it's not been a consistent approach throughout every park because every park is unique and different, and the parking capacity is really different at all the different parks. So we're looking at both the parking area and also the beach capacity. At a place like Crescent Beach, it's a very lengthy beach and there's a large parking area, so we can naturally accommodate more people there. But at a place like Peaks Kenny, I think someone had asked about Peaks Kenny, the beach area is not that big. So we have limited that capacity to 50%. And essentially what that looks like is 50%, when 50% of the parking lot fills up, we cap it. Folks are allowed to wait in line depending on the park and depending on the parking situation outside of the gates. They're allowed to wait in line, and then when a car leaves, we let another one in. We have been monitoring that over the course of the last few weeks, and in some cases we are looking at inching that upward to make sure that our staff and visitors are comfortable with that. And you know, another variable to look at is a place like Popham Beach, which is, I don't know how many of you have been to, but it's a very, very different looking place at high tide and low tide. At high tide, the beach is small and narrow, and there's just not a lot of room. At low tide, there are hundreds of acres of expanse there. So there are a number of different variables that come into play, but generally it's been 50% at a number of places, but we are looking at inching that upwards.
Good to know, because I am heading to Popham Beach later this summer.
Go early. That's my recommendation.
Go early. Good to know. Thank you.
Early or late, yeah.
Someone had asked if your rangers have noticed more wildlife this spring, since there haven't been as many people probably on the trails.
Yeah, I'll start off with that, and that's a definite yes. I can't tell you the number of park managers I've spoken with over the past couple weeks that particularly when we had 10 parks that were closed through April and May, and the comments about more wildlife use were striking across a number of different places. And the specific example I can give you for a number of our beach parks is that we're actually seeing more nesting pairs of piping plovers than we've seen in a long time. And obviously they're a bird that nests in a very unique dune habitat right along the south coast of Maine. And because of the lack of disturbance from people during nesting season in April and May, we've had actually record numbers of piping plovers. And so now we're needing to cordon off those areas and make sure people stay out of them. But yes, that's been an interesting side note, is more wildlife use.
Eben or Michael, have you noticed any more wildlife in your parks?
Anecdotally, yeah, the same is true. I don't have any beaches with piping plovers, but yeah, moose running the road a little bit more often is a pretty common one up our way. But yes, anecdotally, there's been a number of sort of, whoa, we saw a couple bear cubs in a place that we wouldn't normally, and that kind of thing. So, for sure.
And the same at Acadia. No specific information, but they're certainly out and about. And I'll also note on generally the same topic that our peregrines are back and they're all nesting at this time. So a few of our hiking trails are closed to accommodate that, but we're always happy to see that when they come back.
The black flies are actually out more than normal as well in the park, if you're wondering.
Oh, that's great. Eben, Jane wants to know if Baxter State Park is going to have any volunteer projects this year.
Absolutely. We've been trying to make sure that our staff are sort of comfortable with all of the COVID modifications and different sort of guidelines that we have in place at this point, and trying to make sure that they're all comfortable before we start bringing in other people to that fold. But we do certainly intend to bring volunteers in to help with our usual laundry list of projects in the campgrounds and at the gates and other places. So yes, stay tuned. It should be soon. Not before July 15th is sort of what we've promised campground rangers to sort of get their feet under them. But I think you'll see soon after that we'll be bringing people in. So yeah, stay tuned.
That's great. Jane was also looking to get her hands on a new updated Acadia Park hiking trail map. She tried to find one online, but she couldn't find one. Are there maps located locally on MDI, Mike? Do you know where she could find one?
Absolutely. Of course, many of the shops in Bar Harbor and elsewhere on the island have them. Also at our Hulse Cove Visitor Center, the bookstore there operated by Eastern National is open, and you can pick one up there also.
We have another question from someone who is traveling to Acadia National Park for the first time with small children, 2, 5, and 7 years old, as well as adults. And maybe Aislinn can answer this question too, because I know that you've written about this. What are some suggestions that would be fun for that group of people where they have adults and small children at Acadia National Park this summer?
I'll certainly let Aislinn jump in here as she sees fit, but all kinds of wonderful trails. I always get in trouble when I start naming them because somebody will say, well, you should have mentioned this other one. But Ship Harbor, Wonderland, Great Head, some of the trails down around the Sur de Mont area are all very appropriate for children of that age. Also, off from some of those trails, particularly in the Ship Harbor area, tide pooling, getting the kids out there and getting their hands down in the little backwaters that get left when the tide goes out, and looking for critters there. It is all kinds of fun. Biking on the carriage roads, as some of that age I think would be perfectly capable of biking, so lots and lots of stuff to do.
I agree. I mean, I think he covered it well. The first thing that popped to mind was Wonderland and Ship Harbor, but yeah, carriage roads are great too, right? It's got the smooth surface and the great views and everything. So that would be a great option as well. And I like Bar Island as well for doing the tide pooling, but you just have to be careful if doing the Bar Island hike that you know when the tide is coming in and out, because when the tide comes in, that sandbar disappears that leads out to the island, and then you might be stuck on the island for a very long wait. So that one you have to plan out a little bit more, but that's definitely a kid-friendly hike if you plan it at the right time.
Yeah, and if you go to the carriage trails, of course, Amanda mentions you should get some popovers at the Jordan Pond House. So that's a nice little treat for the whole family after your hike or bike or walk on the carriage trails. Those are nice flat trails. One question from Beth. Is Baxter going to be capping capacity at all this year, the way some of the other parks have?
Yes, following on some of what we've been observing and talking to Andy about, we were concerned about the ability for folks to physically distance at Katahdin trailheads in particular. So we're looking, and we are capping those particular trailhead parking lots at about 50 to 60% of capacity. And we recognize that if we do it there, we sort of have to do it throughout the park as well. So we're cutting back 50, 60% capacity sort of throughout the day use parking areas. Camping reservations are full on 100%. The real issues that we're anticipating at those Katahdin trailheads are people coming simultaneously and going to the outhouses at the same time and lining up to head up the trails. And also it concentrates the use on top of the mountain. So that's some of our thinking behind our sort of 50 to 60% capacity cap for day use only.
Awesome, thank you for answering that. So I'm going to, we have a couple more questions, but I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves so that we can hear your voices and you guys can ask questions directly to our special guest speakers. So I've given you all the ability to unmute, and if you go down in the left-hand corner of your screen, there'll be a little microphone, or if you click on your name in your square, you can see that you can unmute. If you can't, you can just like wave your hand or send me a text. But we'd love to hear some of your questions. Does anybody have one that they'd like to ask these special guests? I'd like to give a shout out to Mike in Bangor, because it appears that his screen in the back is sort of Acadia National Park looking. If you can see that, it is Mike.
Ah,
There you go.
it is. That's Scudic Point. I was hoping somebody would recognize it. And unfortunately it's foggy, but then it's beautiful in the fog as well. I have a couple questions for Mike about Acadia. One is if the touch tank at the College of the Atlantic will be open, because I think that lady that's visiting for the first time with the kids the kids really love the touch tank. And I'd also like to know if the Carroll Homestead's going to be open, and I'd also like to know what the situation's going to be on top of Mount Cadillac, since the buses won't be running.
Okay, I'll try to remember all those. Tank at College of the Atlantic, I'll have to say I'm not sure on that one. So that's an I don't know. Carroll Homestead, in all likelihood, will not be open this year, simply because we don't have the resources to get around and do cleaning and attend to it as we would in a normal year. And Cadillac Mountain, well, with the Island Explorer not running, certainly that's an issue, but the Island Explorer never did go to the top of Cadillac. So that won't be an impediment. I suspect our sunrises and sunsets up there will be as popular as they ever have been.
Great. Now Bernie has gotten into the background game, and his face is kind of floating into Mount Katahdin. So I love all these backgrounds. Thank you guys. Does anybody else have a question? If you can't unmute yourself, you can also hit the little more button and raise your hand or wave, and I can unmute you. Okay, Jane, I see you. Go ahead, Jane.
I hike in Acadia all year round, and I would like to take advantage of, we get there as early as possible so we can get out early before other people come. Thompson Island Information Center hasn't been open. Is it going to be?
It will be. The Thompson Island Information Center is operated for us by the Acadia Chamber of Commerce. And like everybody, they're a little slower than normal coming up to speed this year, but I would hope that it would be open within the next week or two sometime. As I said earlier, the picnic area on the east side of the highway there will probably be closed for the year, but the Info Center will be open.
So I went to Acadia a couple days ago, and you couldn't buy the park pass at the Halls Cove Visitor Center, which I thought you could before. And so we were kind of stuck not having a pass for a while, and we could drive up to the top of Cadillac and get a pass. And so I was just curious, is the overall recommendation that people get passes for Acadia ahead of time online so they're prepared when they go into the park, they already have it and they're all set?
That's certainly the easiest thing to do. And anyone who would like to do that, just go to recreation.gov. You'll see a spot there for Acadia and sign on. You can buy your entrance pass there and print it out before you come. There will be some other places coming on board, though, opening in the near future where you can get them, such as the facility up on Cadillac you mentioned. The entrance station at Sand Beach is now open and has them. So if you forget, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, if you remember it, it makes life easier on if you can buy it and print it off before you come.
I see that Lynn has a question, so I'm going to ask. See if I can unmute Lynn. Go ahead, Lynn. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am fond of going berrying most years at Mount Blue, and they have a very nice blueberry field, and I wonder if the blueberries are doing okay with the drought and so forth. I'm wondering about the status of blueberries.
So when you say Mount Blue, are you referring to Mount Blue State Park?
I am. They have a blueberry field there that they maintain for us they burn it off every 3 years and the whole thing.
That's a good question. I haven't been there in the last week or two, so I don't know what the status of the blueberries has been. As you know, it's been dry everywhere this spring, so I would imagine they might be a little stunted, but I don't know. I would say go up and check it out and let us all know.
It's the best place to blueberry. It's very beautiful with a view of Webb Pond and everything. Anyway.
It is a beautiful spot.
Thank you for that question, Lynn. Does anybody else have any last questions? Anyone planning a trip? Let's see. Well, okay, I guess we did a good job answering oh, Beth, I see you. Go ahead, Beth.
We're going to be at Baxter this coming weekend. which is why we asked about the canoes and we asked about the animals too.
Sounds like you
Last
should
time
bring
we were
your
there, there were
binoculars.
bears. They were bear at South Branch last year, so I wanted to make sure if they were going to be there at Dixie this year.
Yes, we've scheduled all the bears out in advance, so they should be there for you. Yeah, yep.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's great. I myself am going to be exploring Maine a little bit more this summer than I probably have in the past, and I hope that everybody else gets to as well. Thank you all for coming, and Aislinn, thank you for helping me moderate. Eben, Mike, and Andy, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. It's so nice to kind of hear what's really happening on the ground from the people that know. And very much looking forward to getting to all the corners of Maine this summer. Like I said, I'll be sending out some links in a follow-up email so that you guys can do a little bit of planning online before you head out. But until you go, thanks for joining us tonight, and enjoy your 4th of July weekend, everybody, and take advantage of the rest of the summer and the fall. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great night.
I can't imagine a better place to be during the COVID outbreak than the state of Maine.
I agree.
Right. Take care, everyone.